I grew up in a tiny rundown town in central Indiana. We didn't have much, a single grocery store, a gas station, and one public school that served every grade from kindergarten through senior year. Like most kids, I couldn't wait to leave. When I turned 18, I moved to Chicago and never looked back. But life has a funny way of pulling you back to where you started. A few months ago, my mom passed away, and I had to return to handle her affairs. It had been over a decade since I'd been back, and the town looked even worse than I remembered. Most of the businesses were boarded up, the streets cracked and overgrown with weeds. But the most shocking thing? The school. When I was a kid, the school was the heart of the town. Football games, fundraisers, and the occasional holiday event kept the community alive. Now, it was a hulking skeleton of its former self. The windows were shattered, graffiti covered the brick walls, and the front doors hung loosely on their hinges. I asked a few people around town what had happened, but they just shrugged or mumbled something about budget cuts. The weird thing was, nobody seemed to want to talk about it. One night, I couldn't sleep. My mom's house felt empty, suffocating. I decided to take a drive and ended up parked in front of the school. My headlights illuminated the front entrance, casting long shadows across the broken doors. For reasons I still don't fully understand, I got out of the car. Maybe it was nostalgia. Maybe I just wanted a distraction. Either way, I pushed open the creaking front doors and stepped inside. The air was stale and cold, even for late October. My footsteps echoed eerily as I walked through the main hallway. It was strange. Everything looked like it had been abandoned in a hurry. Desks were still in classrooms, papers scattered on the floors. Even the old trophy case by the gym was intact, though the glass was cracked. I wandered into my old homeroom and found my desk still there, complete with carvings from bored students. But as I shone my flashlight across the walls, something caught my eye. Near the chalkboard, there was a door I didn't remember. It was smaller than a regular classroom door and painted the same color as the wall, almost as if someone wanted to hide it. My curiosity got the better of me, and I turned the handle. The door led to a set of narrow stairs, descending into darkness. I hesitated. This felt wrong, but I told myself I'd come this far, so I might as well keep going. The stairs were steep and uneven, and the air grew colder with each step. At the bottom, I found a small concrete hallway, lined with lockers. The metal was rusted, and many of the doors hung open, revealing old shoes, books, and even some clothes. But what really made my skin crawl were the photos. Pinned to the walls were dozens of Polaroids, faces of kids I went to school with. Some were smiling, others looked like candid shots. But the further I went, the stranger they got. The last few rows of photos showed kids crying, their faces streaked with tears, mouths open in silent screams. Then I heard it. A faint sound, like shuffling footsteps behind me. I spun around, my flashlight shaking in my hand, but the hallway was empty. The sound came again, closer this time. Panicking, I ducked into a small room at the end of the hall and slammed the door shut. The room was filled with old filing cabinets and a desk piled with papers. My flashlight beam landed on a yearbook sitting open on the desk. It was from my senior year, but someone had scribbled over the faces of half the students with a black marker. Next to it was a handwritten note. "They won't stop until they have us all." The footsteps were right outside the door now. My heart was pounding as I scanned the room for anything I could use as a weapon. That's when I noticed the ventilation grate near the floor. It was just big enough for me to crawl through. Without thinking, I pried it open and squeezed inside, barely pulling the grate back into place before the door creaked open. Through the slats, I saw someone. or something, step into the room. It was a man, but his face was obscured by a hood, and he held a flashlight that swept the room methodically. My breath hitched as the beam passed over the vent, but he didn't seem to notice. After what felt like an eternity, he left, and I stayed frozen until I was sure he was gone. I crawled through the vents until I found another opening, this one leading into the gym. From there, I ran as fast as I could back to the front entrance and didn't stop until I was in my car, peeling out of the parking lot. The next day, I tried to convince myself it was a dream or some bizarre prank. But when I drove past the school again, I noticed something chilling. The hidden door by the chalkboard, it was gone, replaced with a solid wall. I left town that same afternoon. I don't know who or what was in that basement, and I don't ever plan on finding out. When I was 16, my family lived in a small, quiet town in Montana. It was one of those places where everybody knew everybody, and nothing much ever happened. The highlight of our week was the Friday night football game at the high school, or the occasional potluck at the church. So, when a new family moved into the big, old farmhouse on the edge of town, it was the talk of the entire community. The house had been empty for years, ever since the previous owners died in a car accident. People were curious, myself included. It wasn't often we got newcomers, and this family was different. The Garrison family, as we later learned, consisted of a middle-aged couple and their 3 kids. They were polite enough, but distant, always keeping to themselves. They showed up at the grocery store and the hardware shop, but didn't seem interested in making small talk. The kids didn't go to the local school either. Instead, the parents mentioned they were homeschooled. At first, people chalked it up to them being private, maybe a little shy. But as the weeks went on, things started to feel off. I first noticed it one evening while riding my bike past their house. The Garrison property was surrounded by a large field, and they'd put up a tall wooden fence that wasn't there before. It seemed excessive, but whatever. It wasn't my business. What caught my eye, though, was the bonfire burning in their backyard. Around it stood the entire family, holding hands and chanting something I couldn't make out. I stopped for a moment, watching from the road. That's when one of the kids, I think, turned and looked directly at me. Even from that distance, I could feel the intensity of their stare, and a chill ran down my spine. I pedaled home as fast as I could. The next day, I told my best friend, Jamie, about what I'd seen. He laughed it off, saying it was probably some weird family bonding thing. But a few days later, he came to school looking pale and on edge. "Dude," he said, pulling me aside in the hallway. "I saw them last night." "Saw who?" I asked, confused. "The Garrisons. They were walking through the field behind my house with lanterns, like all of them. It was past midnight, and they were singing or chanting or something. It was creepy as hell." Jamie lived closer to their house than I did, so it made sense they'd pass by his property. But why were they out so late? And what were they doing? A few weeks later, things escalated. My family's dog, Daisy, went missing. She was an old lab, and we thought she might have wandered off and gotten lost. We searched the woods and put up flyers, but there was no sign of her. Then, Jamie's cat disappeared. And then another neighbor's goat. People started whispering that something wasn't right, but no one wanted to accuse the new family outright. One night, Jamie and I decided to find out for ourselves. It was a stupid idea, but we were teenagers and thought we were invincible. We waited until dark and then snuck onto the Garrison property, cutting through the field to avoid being seen. The closer we got to the house, the more uneasy I felt. The air seemed heavier, and the only sounds were the crunch of our footsteps and the occasional hoot of an owl. When we reached the fence, we found a spot where the boards were loose and slipped through. Their backyard was even creepier up close. The bonfire pit was there, surrounded by charred logs and ash. Nearby, we saw a wooden altar of some kind, covered in strange symbols carved into the surface. Jamie whispered something about turning back, but I wasn't ready to give up. We crept closer to the house, sticking to the shadows. That's when we heard voices coming from the barn. Slowly, we approached and peeked through a crack in the door. Inside, the entire family was gathered around a table. On it was Daisy, or what was left of her. My stomach turned as I realized they were performing some kind of ritual. The parents chanted while the kids stood silently, their faces blank and emotionless. Jamie stumbled back, accidentally kicking over a bucket. The noise echoed in the still night, and the chanting stopped. The father turned toward the door, his eyes meeting mine through the crack. "Run," I whispered, grabbing Jamie's arm. We bolted, crashing through the field as fast as we could. Behind us, we heard shouting and the sound of footsteps. I didn't dare look back. When we finally reached the road, we collapsed, gasping for air. The next morning, we told our parents everything. At first, they didn't believe us, but when other neighbors started sharing their own suspicions, the sheriff was called to investigate. By the time he arrived at the Garrison house, it was empty. The family had vanished, leaving behind their belongings, the altar, and the charred remains of several animals. No one ever figured out where they went, and the house remains abandoned to this day. Sometimes, when I visit home, I drive past it and think about that night, about the chanting, about Daisy, and about how lucky Jamie and I were to get out of there alive. I've lived in Hollow Creek my whole life. It's the kind of place where not much happens. No malls, no big city lights, just quiet streets, friendly neighbors, and an old reservoir that everyone avoids once the sun sets. People say it's cursed, but I never bought into that. At least, not until last night. I was heading home after my shift at the diner. It was late, close to midnight, and the roads were empty. That's normal for Hollow Creek. Nobody's out that late unless they're working the night shift or passing through. My car, an old sedan that's barely holding together, rattled as I drove down the back roads. The reservoir was just ahead, and I didn't think twice about it. I've driven past it hundreds of times. As I came around the curve, my headlights caught someone, standing by the edge of the water. A man. He was tall, wearing a dark jacket, and just standing there. Not fishing, not moving, just staring out at the water. I slowed down, my stomach twisting. Maybe he was in trouble. Maybe he needed help. I pulled over and rolled my window down a crack. "You okay?" The man didn't move. He didn't even turn around. I waited, my hand hovering over the gear shift. Something about him felt off, like the air around him was heavier. Finally, he turned his head just slightly, enough for me to see the edge of his face. He wasn't looking at the water anymore. He was looking at me. My heart skipped a beat. His face was shadowed, but I could see enough to know he wasn't happy I was there. His expression was blank, almost empty, but his eyes, they felt like they were drilling right through me. I panicked and hit the gas, speeding away without looking back. My hands were shaking as I gripped the wheel, but I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe he was just some guy who wanted to be left alone. I kept driving, watching the rearview mirror, half expecting him to appear behind me. The road stretched on, empty and quiet, until I saw headlights coming up fast. too fast. At first, I thought it was just another car, but as the lights got closer, I realized it was a truck, a big one. It roared up behind me, its high beams blinding me, and stayed there, right on my bumper. I tried to speed up, but my old car couldn't handle it. The truck swerved, almost clipping me, and then it fell back. I thought it was over until I hit the next curve and saw it. A second truck, parked on the side of the road, blocking the way. My heart sank. I slammed on the brakes, my car skidding to a stop. The truck behind me stopped too, its engine rumbling. I was trapped. The driver from the second truck got out. It was the man from the reservoir. He walked toward me slowly, like he had all the time in the world. My mind raced. My phone was in my bag on the passenger seat. If I reached for it, he'd see. I locked the doors and gripped the steering wheel, trying to think of what to do. He reached my window and tapped on the glass with a knife. My stomach dropped. His lips curled into a smile, and he motioned for me to roll the window down. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "Leave me alone." He didn't say anything, just kept tapping the knife, his smile fading. The driver from the truck behind me got out and started walking toward my car too. There were two of them now. I had no choice. I threw the car into reverse and slammed on the gas. My car squealed as it backed up, the man with the knife jumping out of the way. The truck behind me tried to block me in, but I swerved into the ditch and back onto the road, the undercarriage of my car scraping the pavement. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I drove straight to the police station, my heart pounding the entire way. When I told the officer what happened, he gave me a look like he'd heard it all before. "You're lucky," he said. "Not everyone who sees them gets away." Apparently, there'd been reports of similar incidents for years, always near the reservoir. Trucks blocking the road, men trying to stop cars. No one knows who they are or what they want, but the disappearances speak for themselves. I didn't sleep last night. I keep thinking about those trucks, about the man's face, and how close I came to whatever it was they had planned. I don't think I'll ever drive past the reservoir again. And if you're ever near a town like mine, do yourself a favor. Stay on the main roads. Thanks so much for listening to Nightmare Narratives. We hope you enjoyed these truly terrifying stories. If you did, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you'll know when we post new videos every Tuesday and Friday at 10 a.m. Central Time. If you have a scary story you'd like to hear read on the channel, email us at officialnightmarenarratives@gmail.com, and you might just hear your story in a future episode. Thanks again for listening, and stay spooky, friends. We'll catch you in the next one.